अरिहा शरणं मुझने हो जो आत्म शुद्धि करवा, सिद्धा शरणं मुझने हो जो राग द्वेष ने हरवा। अरिहा शरणं मुझने हो जो आत्म शुद्धि करवा, सिद्धा शरणं मुझने हो जो राग द्वेष ने हरवा। साहु शरणं मुझने हो जो संयम शूरा बनवा, धम्मो शरणं मुझने हो जो भवोदधीति तरवा।
अरिहा शरणं सिद्धा शरणं साहु शरणं वरिये, धम्मो शरणं आमे विनय जिन आड़ा शिर धरिये।
मंगलमय चारेनु शरणु सघड़ी आपदा टाड़े, चिद घन तेरी डूबती नैया शाश्वत नगरे वाड़े। मंगलमय चारेनु शरणु सघड़ी आपदा टाड़े, चिद घन केरी डूबती नैया शाश्वत नगरे वाड़े। भवो भवना पापों ने मारा, अंतर थी हूँ निंदु छूं, सर्व जीवों ना सुकृतों ने अंतर थी अनुमोदु छूं।
अरिहा शरणं सिद्धा शरणं साहु शरणं वरिये।
Good evening, everyone. Hope you're all well. Today, welcome to our regular Oshwal talks. I will let Madhusudan Bhai tell you a little bit more about Vijay Bhai in a few moments, but just wanted to share, have a couple of minutes of your time to say that the reason behind these Oshwal talks that we're doing is to educate, guide, and inspire people. Hopefully we're doing that. Last month we had Ricky and Savan Haria, who shared their journey into the business world. And as a result of their help, we've had about 30 people join their mentoring offer that they gave. So that's been a really good outcome for us. And we'd like to do more of those. Next month, we have another young entrepreneur who is a leading member of a large energy company. And in fact, not a leading member, he's a co-founder of the energy company. So he'll be sharing his journey, plus also some new news. And it kind of goes hand in hand with what Vijay Bhai is going to talk about climate change and saving the planet. For future talks, what we'd like to do is to encourage younger people to come forward and share their journey on anything that they've done, whether it's music, art, sports, business, and share their journey with us. We want to encourage Oshwas to come forward and help inspire other people as well. So if you want to get in touch, oshwalweb@oshwal.org is the email to write to. Send us your ideas, thoughts, or even somebody you know. So it would be good to hear from you. So before I take up too much of your time, I'll pass you across to Madhusudan Bhai, who's going to introduce you to Vijay Bhai.
Thank you, Paresh Bhai. Hello, everyone. Vijay is born in Ilford, East London in 1981. He finished schooling at Seven Kings High School. He went to Loughborough University and graduated as an aeronautical engineer. He has worked as an aerospace engineer in various capacities in many places in United Kingdom and in France, Switzerland, and Holland. He has worked on the Dyson electric car. His present work is as an aerospace engineer designing instruments to land on the moon. Traveling has been a big part of his life. In all, he has spent over 3 years traveling all over the world and has visited over 35 countries, many as a backpacker. He is an expedition leader and has led expeditions for British Exploring Society to Iceland, Arctic Canada, and Peruvian Andes. He is a keen mountaineer and has solo climbed many peaks over 5,000 meters in South America. He is a trained rescue scuba diver and has made over 150 dives. In 2017, Vijay was one of the selected candidates for the 12-week-long BBC astronaut program. Vijay has been invited twice by the Duke of Edinburgh Awards Committee to present gold awards to winners at the Buckingham Palace. Vijay is a photographer and a filmmaker. I recommend viewers should go on his blog on Google, as there are excellent films on various subjects which will interest you. I especially recommend the 5-minute-long film titled The Murmurs of Jamnagar. You will also read about his many other interests on his Google blog. Vijay is married to Libby, who is a wildlife filmmaker and at present making a series for Netflix. They have one 19-month-old son. Thank you. Now over to Vijay.
Hello, everyone. Okay, let's get the share screen sorted first, and then and I can continue. It's a bit hard to multitask. Here we go. Great. Okay, I think we're there. Thank you so much for logging online to listen to me talk. It did mean that I got out of bedtime routine, which is great. So it's a win-win for everyone. But more importantly, I'm so glad that I can be with you here today to talk about something that is, as you'll see, it is the most important topic that we are facing. So as explained, my name is Vijay Shah, and cumulatively over the last couple of decades, I have spent over 3 years on expedition or traveling across the world, from the high mountains to deserts and to the high Arctic. And over the last 2 decades of travel, I've seen firsthand how the world is changing due to climate change. And if you let me, I'd like to take you on a journey through my Arctic expeditions about, quite literally, what is the state of the planet. It was a really warm day in the Arctic. We were at the start of our expedition in 2011 to cross the Penny ice cap and on Canada's Baffin Island. And the -10 to -15 degrees Celsius that we were facing that day was the best we could hope for. This was my 3rd expedition to Baffin Island and my 6th into the Arctic Circle, the other 3 expeditions being on the European side of Svalbard, Arctic Norway, and Arctic Iceland. Now, Baffin Island is the 5th largest island in the world, but yet most people haven't heard of it. And it sits in northeastern Canada, most of it being in the Arctic Circle. And despite its size, which is twice the size of the UK, it only has about 11,000 inhabitants, making it one of the most sparsely populated places on the planet. Our expedition was attempting to open up a new route crossing the Penny ice cap, said to be left over from the last ice age. We flew into the Inuit community of Kikatajak, which is actually an island, and you can kind of see, maybe you can point it out on the red triangle on the right-hand image. But of course, it's all connected to the mainland during the winter months where all of the ice is frozen over. And it's home to about 500 people. And hopefully, all being well, at the end of the expedition, we'll end up in the southern community of Paynton, where we can fly out from. At the start of the expedition, and the image that you saw just previously, we were packed all our kit onto snowmobiles from the village and taken out via snowmobile to our predetermined start point. Our Inuit outfitters will then leave the three of us there with all our equipment and food and fuel, and they would return back with the snowmobiles to the community. And we would be left to our own devices and for our own survival. And generally, the Inuit think we're a little bit mad for embarking on such journeys, but really, the scenery more than makes up for it. We travelled past massive icebergs, halted in the voyage south by the freezing seas. They towered stories above us, dwarfing us in their majesty. We stopped in awe, and the silence that followed was deafening. And you can see, if you look closely on the right-hand side of the image, you can see our snowmobiles there and a small figure approaching the iceberg, and you can really appreciate the size of it. We passed seal holes where some way in the distance a sunbathing seal quickly dropped down through the hole onto the safety of the sea as they heard our snowmobile approaching. And Arctic hares raced past us, somehow managing to maintain the same speed while shooting up a 50-degree mountain slope. We witnessed the extraordinary shapes created by pressure ice as the seas froze, creating these extraordinary shapes that we had to weave in and out of and up and down to find the easiest way through. And then we came across these footprints. Now, there's only one animal in the Arctic that can make footprints like this. And in fact, very few in the world that can make footprints this large. And to really appreciate the size of these footprints, you can see my hand next to it. And yes, it is the polar bear. But on top of those big footprints in the middle, you can see two smaller sets of footprints either side. And that is undoubtedly, two young cubs. So this is a young family, a mother and two cubs. And at this time of the year of late March, those cubs would only been born a few months earlier. And in fact, they would have spent their entire life up until now inside a den. So they might only have been outside in the outside world for only a few days or so. Those footsteps were all heading in the direction that we were going to. And so it wasn't long till we came across the polar bears themselves. But our noisy snowmobile spooked the mother, and she started running as fast as she could. And we stopped and watched. However, the cubs, being as young as they were struggling to keep up. And one in particular fell further and further behind. And in fact, this little cub fell so far behind that he stopped, he turned around, he barked at us, and then he started running towards us. This was really the wrong thing to do, because this little cub is reliant on his mother for his entire survival. There's no way he could survive with us or without or by himself at all. So it's decided that we would intervene. We used the snowmobiles to chase the polar bear, the young cub, into the right direction, and it worked partly. The young cub, he found his mother's footprints and he started following them. But his mother hadn't waited, and by now she was kilometers away, and we realized that he would really struggle to catch up with her. It was decided then that we would have to intervene further, and we would use the snowmobiles to catch the bear and bring it back to his mother. So we use the snowmobiles as like an army pincer movement, where we cut off its directions from either side before jumping off the snowmobiles and then grabbing the polar bear, picking it up, putting it on the snowmobiles, get to his mother and drop the bear back to his mother. Well, that was the idea. It was easier said than done, because the young bear had sharp teeth and long claws, and he certainly didn't want to be caught. I managed to capture this last the last bit of this adventure on film, which I'd like to share with you.
We're trying to get this cub back its mother. But it's, of course, doesn't want to be caught, and it's going to bite.
At this stage, I took over driving one of the snowmobiles, and I could not video record and drive at the same time. The next clip you see is after we have caught the bear using the tent to prevent it and us from getting hurt.
We just take it to the mother. So at the end of this epic, we've caught the polar bear, and Billy's just taken over from me from driving, and we're releasing the other polar bear. There he goes. He's just attacking. Oh, he's got caught. He's going the wrong way. So the mother's on the hillside, and the cub, there he is, and there she is on the hillside. She's now waiting for him, and hopefully he will get to her. There's the mother and the other cub, and there's the baby. Polar bear trappers. How high?
That's a bit unusual for the mother just to leave, just like that.
She was very scared.
They usually wait for the cub.
How high?
Good thing we catch up the little one to the...
Yeah.
But you better. First down.
It was absolutely fantastic to see that family back together again. And that was literally the first day of the expedition, and we had the rest of the expedition to get through. Billy, who you saw in that clip over there, our Inuit outfitter, he states that in the village of Kikatajawak, that they are seeing more and more polar bears coming into the village than ever before. But scientists that have been studying bear populations are becoming increasingly worried about the future for polar bears. So which of these people are right? Well, in fact, they both are, but that's not good news for the polar bear. The polar bear is a highly adapted predator, an evolutionary process that has taken thousands of years. Dense fur means no exposed skin. Each hair of their fur is hollow, trapping the maximum amount of air. A thick layer of fat gives warmth and buoyancy during swims in the cold Arctic Sea. And huge feet disperse their weight, and bumpy foot pads aid grip so they can walk and run over the slippery sea ice. These large feet make also great paddles for swimming too. Strong and powerful limbs allow them to run and outpace seals, and a narrow skull combined with long, strong neck muscles and sharp teeth enable them to be bold predators, plunging through the snow hole headfirst to find seals with the incredible strength to pull them out. Polar bears depend on the sea ice to move around their habitat and hunt their primary source of food, which is seals. They use the sea ice for tracking a mate and for breeding. And they only survive on land in the summer months, only by utilizing the fat reserves that they have built up during a successful season of hunting. Polar bears are reliant on the sea ice for their entire survival. However, the sea ice is more important than just for the polar bear. Sea ice is the enabler for the entire Arctic ecosystem, for which the polar bear reigns as a top predator. The sea ice acts as an upside-down soil, where on the underside of the soil, algae and other photosynthetic phytoplankton can grow. This is fed on by copepods and other zooplankton, and this is the food source for Arctic cod. Arctic cod is a key food source for almost every other Arctic marine mammal, from the beluga whale and the narwhal to almost every Arctic seal species. And in short, without the ice, there is no cod, and without the cod, the entire food chain breaks down. So the ice plays a pivotal role in initiating the Arctic food web, generating food for all wildlife in the Arctic Ocean. And the ice is disappearing. Pictures taken periodically from NASA satellites show a reduction in sea ice of 13.1% per decade since 1979. In 2012, the total volume of Arctic sea ice calculated by scientists plummeted to a stunning new record low that was a mere 20% of the ice volume that existed in 1979. It is absolutely beyond comprehension how fast that the sea ice is disappearing. And it is estimated that due to this rate of warming, that the Arctic will be ice-free in the summer time before the mid-century. The sea ice is, of course, disappearing to increasing global temperatures due to climate change. And the Arctic is at the forefront of climate change and experiences temperatures far higher than global average levels. It is the surge in carbon dioxide and methane levels in our atmosphere that has pushed greenhouse gases to record highs. This instability in our atmosphere is causing our climate to change. A recent study compares greenhouse gas levels in the atmosphere today with the last time in history that they were at a similar level. The last time that they were at similar levels than they are today was 2.7 million years ago. The same study from climatologists have found that at that time, sea levels were 20 meters higher than today. And that is the equilibrium that our world will settle into with respect to the greenhouse gases in our atmosphere. And many of the most populated areas in the world would be completely underwater in this scenario. And I know many of you are joining this talk from London, and London is 11 meters above sea level. So, you'll be 10 meters underwater in this scenario. Now, this isn't going to happen overnight or in our lifetime, but the inertia that is in the world, that in order to prevent this from happening, then the windows for change will close within the next few years. And so with the sea ice disappearing, polar bears are being forced to come onto land looking for food. And sadly, their keen sense of smell brings them to human communities and villages, and in particular, the rubbish dumps, leading to a greater conflict between man and bear. And in such conflicts, it is the bear that always comes worst off. So our expedition took 19 days to cross the Aiutik National Park, the Penny Ice Cap, which sits within the Aiutik National Park. The Aiutik translates from Inuktitut into the land that never melts. The top left picture that you see there on the image shows the tent, how our tent, the inside of our tent would look like some mornings when when ice and snow would grow, crystals would grow on the inside of the tent. And we have to be extremely careful that that snow doesn't start to fall off and penetrate our sleeping bag or our clothing, which will render our insulating clothing useless. We had to build snow walls every evening to prevent our tents from being blown away or destroyed by the blizzards that we were facing. And we had to keep every inch of our skin covered to prevent frostnip and frostbite. But despite this, and despite having issues with our stoves, with a route finding, with almost running out of food, 19 days on the ice, we were coming to the last day of the expedition. We were within touching distance of Pangnirtung. But we woke up that last day in a blizzard, a whiteout. The whiteout disorientates and confuses. The Arctic was not going to, let us go so quickly and so easily. And with no reference points or even the shadows of the sun to distinguish ground from sky, we had to rely solely on our compass for direction. But we were motivated. We would soon be in Pangnirtung and soon be having a hot cup of coffee and on the flight home. And we were confident and motivated and happy, and we moved forwards. But 6 kilometers from the Inuit community, we came to an area where the snow was wet. I looked behind me and I saw my tracks of my skis were filling up with water. And this can only mean one thing: thin ice. I was ahead, so I tested the ground first by stabbing hard with my poles before standing down with my ski while supporting myself onto the stronger ice on my other leg. I tested out the ground before I put my weight onto it. It was solid enough. And so we followed this process, slowly edging forwards. But because of the whiteout, we could not tell, I could not tell how expansive this area of thin ice was, of this wet ice. Was it local? Was it extended? Which direction do I need to go into thicker ice? And so we slowly edged forwards, changing directions willy-nilly as we think that we're heading on to stronger and stronger ice. But I had not advanced more than 100 meters before I heard a shouting behind me and the dreaded sound of ice cracking. I whipped round and I saw one of my teammates, Anthony, standing there, but where was Duncan? Twisting myself, looking down, I saw a broken section of ice and Duncan in the middle of a black hole. He had cracked through the thin ice, dropping him, skis and all, into the freezing waters beneath. His pole, fortunately, hadn't gone into the water with him. Otherwise, that would literally drag him under. But we had to get out. He had to get out of the water and get out fast. At the moment, the very instant he drops in, his insulating clothing, all filled up with air, will be keeping him buoyant. But very soon, as the water penetrates his clothing will suddenly become a heavy anchor and drag him under. He had to get out fast. But there was very little we could do. We could not approach this area of thin ice. The ice that he had fallen through had already weakened significantly. And if Anthony and I had approached a hole and we had broken through, well, this accident would have turned into a complete disaster and there would be no hope at all. It was best if he could get out himself. So we shouted at him, shouting encouragement with him. But at the same time, we prepped the rope and we started to think about what sort of type of extraction we could do from afar. But the best course of action was if he could get out himself. We watched as he clawed himself and swam to the edge of the hole and using his elbows onto the edge of the ice, he tried to kick himself out of the ice. But you can imagine how difficult that must be with skis on your legs and wet, sodden clothing that was really thick. Well, it's the ice that gave way. The ice could not support his weight and the hole, it broke, the edge of the hole broke off and the hole was bigger. We shouted again and told him, and I spotted on the other side of the hole, it seemed to be a little bit better, a little bit thicker. Try that side. Duncan swam across to that side and then he managed to get his elbows onto the side and managed to eke and crawl and nailed himself out of that hole. Despite the fact that we were out of imminent danger, we weren't out of the clear just yet. Duncan was sodden with wet clothing and we were on this section of very thin ice. You know, how thin does it get? Can we get to Paddington in one place? And on top of that, we obviously couldn't see very far. And so began the most difficult part of that expedition, those last few hours of skiing into Paddington. We were surprised by having found the ice so thin at this time of the year. Melting of this part of the sea ice should not have started so early, and it should have been completely safe to ski into Paddington without a situation like this occurring. But due to the melting of the Arctic, this is the new reality that everyone has to get used to. And one of the major, most sought after rites of passage for any Arctic adventurer is the skiing to the North Pole from land in the summertime. And due to the melting ice that we're experiencing year upon year in the summertime, there hasn't been any trips like this since 2015. And it's very likely that the last person to have ever skied to North Pole in the summertime from land has already happened and will never happen again. But there are two more important things that we've got to think about or understand when we talk about melting in the Arctic. And is that what is happening in the Arctic is happening elsewhere. The Arctic experiencing temperature rises far greater than the rest of the global average is the canary in the coal mine. You know, if the Arctic suffers, then we know that we're going to suffer in a similar event, similar situations. And that because of these systems, all of our global climate systems is all interconnected, that what happens in the Arctic affects everywhere else. When I first wrote this presentation, it was in 2015, and I was in the Lake District, and 2015 was the wettest winter. It was January in 2015. Oh, sorry, January 2016, and it was the wettest winter that they'd had up there. And I was going to update these headlines with up-to-date headlines, but I thought, well, what's the point? Because they would literally just be replicas of themselves. I was spoiled for choice of looking for new articles about flooding that we had experienced or not more recently. And in fact, you know, I found one very quickly. In fact, this was from yesterday, from the Environmental Agency, saying that the worst case scenario of every single prediction that's ever been made is what we are seeing in reality. And in fact, 2019 was the wettest year on record in Northern England and in the Midlands. And how is the UK coping as a rich country? You know, not that great, I'd say. But the flooding that we experience almost on a yearly basis now can be directly linked to the loss of Arctic sea ice due to changes in the jet stream. The jet stream is a river of meandering wind that travels from west to east, and it is the primary means of transporting weather systems around the world. And there is one important factor that influences how this wind behaves, and that is the temperature differential between the cold Arctic and the warm tropical regions. And when that temperature differential is high, then the jet stream is strong, it is powerful, fast, and it's kind of in a straight line. It doesn't meander very much. But when that temperature differential is very low, i.e. by a warming Arctic, well, that influences the jet stream to become slower and weaker. And as a result, it meanders massively. And these big meanders create a greater probability of extreme and prolonged weather, such as the flooding that we experience almost on a yearly basis now in the UK. On the other side of the Atlantic, and in fact, we've probably heard about what's happening in Texas. You know, Texas is frozen, and that is very much as a result of the polar vortex, about these meanders of the jet stream that are bringing all of this cold Arctic weather that would normally have been locked away by that jet stream up north. Is all being brought down south and causing areas that aren't used to seeing such sort of temperatures under prolonged issues that are causing massive issues. But you know, people don't quite understand that. In fact, this was a tweet from last year when, you know, almost a year ago today, when they experienced another polar vortex issue on certain areas of the United States that aren't used to being frozen. But and I'm so glad that I can say that this guy is no longer in charge of that country. But you know, that sort of response is only, we see it all too often. Well, I guess maybe let's consider some of this good old-fashioned global warming. Here we go. Here's some good old-fashioned global warming. This graph shows the temperature variation over the last 2,000 years, and it's normalized. The zero line is an average between 2000 and 2020. That's the kind of the zero line. And if we ignore the right-hand side of the graph, which looks horrid, over the last 2,000 years, we have been in a cooling period of our climate. And in fact, we were heading towards another ice age in a few thousand years. But that has dramatically changed since the Industrial Revolution. and we have changed the future of the planet forever. And as a result, we're not going to head into an ice age in a few thousand years. In fact, it's looking not very good at all. And the fact is, the more energy that there is in the system, the more volatility that you have, and that's in any system, including our climate. And so what that means for our climate is that we're going to have a greater chance and severity of floods, droughts, heat waves, freezes, storms, all manners of extreme weather. And also fires. How we've seen in the last year, even in the last year, that we've seen extreme fire events that actually we don't really remember that much of. You know, they come and they captivate our imagination, and then we're straight on to the next disaster. And these events are massive, and they really should, you know, stay with us for a lot longer. The California wildfires in 2020 burned more than 10.3 million acres, and that's more than double than that was seen burnt in 2019. The rainforest is becoming hotter and drier, and it's causing these droughts that the Amazon rainforest, the lungs of the planet, is causing trees to die off, and it becomes a vicious cycle. As more trees die, the surrounding area becomes hotter and drier. And at the moment, the rainforest has this closed canopy that shades and protects the trees. But once you take that away, it opens the canopy and you get more space in the rainforest, and that sun penetrates and dries off more land, causing fires or just killing off the trees, creating more reducing the amount of trees, and thus making it hotter and drier as a result. And the rainforest generates its own weather, but the more trees that die off, it doesn't have the capability of generating the amount of rain that it experiences. And so this becomes a vicious cycle, a positive feedback loop, and more of that later. But it's likely that the rainforest would be approaching savannification, and some scientists think that we're very close to that tipping point where that is we can no longer reverse that from happening. And who remembers the great fires in Australia at the beginning of 2020? I know we've had a pandemic, but you know, remember these massive fires, and it was estimated that over 1 billion animals perished in those fires, where global warming has boosted the risk of this hot and dry weather by over 30%. And in fact, these events are going to be happening 4 times as frequent if temperatures reached 2 degrees Celsius. And we're seeing fires that are happening and burning in areas that really should not be burning at all. In the high Arctic, where temperatures at this time when these fires were happening was over 25 degrees Celsius, and much hotter than we were experiencing in the UK at that time. And this is starting to become more and more of a frequent event, and it becomes a positive feedback mechanism. You know, all of these fires are releasing more greenhouse gases, which is warming our climate, which will then cause more fires. Again, we'll talk about positive feedback mechanisms a bit later. Due to these increased likelihoods of floods, droughts, heat waves, and all manners of extreme weather events, there will be a greater chance of failed crops and food scarcity. The planet above shows the world as it is now, with the food insecurity running from a light beige to a dark brownish red. The areas grayed out are deemed to be rich enough to not become affected by food insecurity for now, such as the UK, North America, in fact, all of the global north. And the graphic here shows the projection of how the world would be in 2080 if we just carry on as we are without making drastic changes that are needed. And you can see that Africa and South Asia will be heavily impacted, with South America following shortly behind. And the poor and the most vulnerable will undoubtedly be the most affected by this. And it's going to be leading to more conflicts and more regional wars and the mass movements of people greater than anything we have seen before. Essentially, environmental refugees in the millions. And we're already seeing this. We started to see a big movement of people in Central America where crops and harvests were failing, and they were moving northward in Central America. And we see that in the Northern Africa as well already. But despite all of this, what I've said so far, unfortunately, the real danger is yet to come. And that's via these positive feedback mechanisms. And these are situations that, as previously explained, from the way that the Amazon die-off is causing temperatures to rise, which causes greater die-off. And also I touched on about how what's happening in the Arctic sea ice, but that's also in a positive feedback mechanism where the sea ice, being very white, it acts as a giant reflector and it reflects the sunlight that's coming in from obviously the sun back off into space. But as the ice melts, the sun, more and more of the sun is hitting the dark ocean, and the ocean absorbs that heat. And as the ocean temperature rises as a result of absorbing that heat, it melts the ice around it, and thus there's even less sea ice to reflect that heat, and thus you get this positive feedback mechanism. But one of the most concerning is the looming melting of the permafrost. Permafrost is a region in the Northern Hemisphere which is encompassing about 90 million square kilometers of land. And it's an area that is permanently frozen land. And within that land lies approximately 1,700 gigatons of sequestered carbon from organic matter that has died over millennia. And that is about twice the amount that is currently in our atmosphere. The Intergovernmental Panel for Climate Change report in 2013 estimates that 300 gigatons of this heat-trapping carbon pollution will be emitted into the atmosphere over the next 85 years from melting permafrost. Well, what does that mean? Well, in comparison, in the entire period of humanity, we have released approximately, cumulatively, an absolute total of about 550 gigatons of carbon. So the disintegrating permafrost is expected to add 50% on top of that total of emissions. And that is without us doing anything. And the impact on the feedback of this feedback mechanism will be horrific for any chance of being able to control and reduce emissions. Again, paleo research from climatologists looking at past climate situations shows that the permafrost melted completely when temperatures were 1.5 degrees Celsius higher than pre-industrial levels. Now, remember that 1.5 degrees Celsius, we'll be talking about that very soon. We are currently, as per my earlier slide, at 0.86 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial limits. And the melt, we're already starting to see that melt has already started. And it's abundantly clear that from every angle that we view it, that we're not in a particularly great place, and we have to do something drastic about this. And when I first wrote this presentation in 2015, we were in it was quite an optimistic period, because it was the first time in history at the COP21 in Paris that every single country in the world had gotten together and had agreed on doing something and creating a hard limit to limit global heating to below 2 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial limits, and with a loose kind of non-binding target of 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial limits. And the graph above shows the red line shows the temperature rise, what's expected if we don't do anything, when we carry on as we are. And the blue line shows how we've limited it to 2 degrees Celsius. The graph below shows similarly what we need to do with emissions, where the blue line shows the drastic reduction of emissions immediately and the continued reduction in order to achieve this limitation of 2 degrees Celsius. And by the way, this does not take into account any of these feedback mechanisms. But what has happened since? So, as per what we've seen in the last slide, this is the current emissions trajectory as deemed as the business as usual, and what we've seen since 2015. And this is what would happen if every country that had pledged to do what they were doing did what they did. So as part of the Paris Agreement, every country in the world, they come together and say what they're going to do in order to reduce their emissions by so and so amount. So, you know, country A, the UK will say, I'm going to do A, B, and C in order to reduce my emissions to meet my my pledge of reducing to 2 degrees Celsius. Well, if you take on all of these A, Bs, and Cs of everything that every country in the world has pledged to do, and you add them all up together, you can see this path. And really, I can't see much difference between that and the emissions trajectory if we did do nothing. Those pledges aren't really there. There's not many there. And to put that into context, well, this is what needs to happen in order to create 2 degrees Celsius. It is clear that politics has failed spectacularly in tackling this issue. But so far, I've only talked about changes to the climate. There is also something equally as damning happening across our biosphere. We are in the 6th mass extinction with the collapse of our biosphere compared to 1970s. But more alarming than those graphs themselves and those statistics is that 1970 was not a great baseline. And it's only chosen because that was the kind of the earliest period that actual good data existed for. For the older members of the audience, I'm sure you will testify that from your own experiences that wildlife has been decreasing significantly before the 1970s. It is absolutely clear that we have to find another way and new technologies. And some of the changes can only be made by our government, for which we vote in. So actually we are responsible for that too. But there are also major impacts that we as consumers can make, such as cutting down flying. Well, we've certainly done that during the pandemic, but we need to make sure that remains so. But one industry that is more important and one we can affect every day is the food and agricultural industry, which is actually the largest use of land use on the planet. 14.5% of all global greenhouse gases is just from the animal agricultural industry. And that's greater than the entire transport industry combined. Meat and dairy production is one of the primary causes of greenhouse gases. And the reasons why, in particular, beef and cows and milk is that that methane is generated through burps, through digestion process, and nitrous oxide comes from their waste. And these two gases are many times more potent than carbon dioxide as a greenhouse gas. The 2 degrees Celsius target, or any target, cannot happen without a massive reduction in animal agriculture. And that really must start with demand. And it is really much about what you eat, not where it's from. In this graph here, it shows for each food substance, it shows the contribution of each part of the supply chain in contributing to the total greenhouse gas emissions of that particular food substance. And transportation, circled in red there, it's the red bar that you see in each of these bar charts. And you can see it's very small in each of these food items. So it very much is about what you eat and not where it comes from. That's important. But as mentioned, there are things that we cannot influence individually. And the greatest emitter by industry is, of course, energy production and the manufacturing industry. We also need to reduce the amount that we produce and throw away. And our political economic governance model of perpetual growth really has to change. And for that, we need governments nationally and internationally to act and find the solutions that are environmentally sustainable. And they're not doing that nearly fast enough. And that's why the rules have to change, and they have to start today. We have to find a new way of governance that does not rely on perpetual consumption or growth, and we have to come together nationally and internationally to demand this. So what can we do? Well, we have to make the changes to our own lives to reduce our carbon footprint, real changes, and be serious about it. What are we eating? And do we really need to buy and consume as much as we do? And does it actually enrich our lives? Also, where is our money and savings and pensions being invested? Are our savings and the banks that we choose to put our money in, or the share funds or the pensions, are they actually funding climate breakdown? If they are, well, let's move that money. I mean, who cares about a single half a percentage point difference or whatever? You know, we're talking about the future of our world. We also have to support groups that are trying to bring this to the forefront, such as Extinction Rebellion, whether that's actively and participating with them or passively, you know, knowing that you are supporting them, because really, you know, it is about the future of our world that they're trying to protect. But above all of this, I would argue the most important than any of this is to be responsible about how we digest and disseminate information. There is a lot of misinformation out there that is engineered to seed doubt, cause endless debate, and essentially derail any action. And we have to be responsible in finding out what is, if anything, is the hidden agenda. Who is funding the new work article? Is it accurate? Should I share it? If misinformation is being shared, should I stand up and say that is unacceptable? The climate is clearly changing at an alarming pace, and it can be overwhelming. It is a massive challenge, and it's not just affecting our children's lives or our children's children's. It will affect our lives as well. The impact of change is massive. And it is a massive challenge. It's ridiculous. It is an existential challenge. But we've also faced challenges before, such as right now in this health pandemic with coronavirus. And we have seen that we can immediately change our lifestyles if required. We also have seen that countries that have tackled early and with a strong response fare a lot better than those that do not. And it is our actions that have led to this situation, but therein lies our hope. The road ahead is definitely hard, but it'll be a lot easier if we take action than if we don't take action. And sometimes it can appear insurmountable. But when I really think about this challenge, and when sometimes it does feel overwhelming, when we do look at these statistics, it can be. I'm reminded about launching expeditions. One of the reasons why we love to hear stories of expeditions to the world's most inhospitable places is to hear how people succeed when the odds were stacked against them, where the adventurer must overcome countless obstacles put in front of them. Sometimes, though, we do not succeed. But the times that I haven't, it has never haunted me, because I know I tried everything in my power to make it succeed. The expedition to cross the Penny ice cap, where we encountered the polar bears and where Duncan fell through the ice, was actually the second time that Auntie and I attempted the crossing. The first time was 3 years earlier, and despite a year's worth of planning and despite investing all our savings into the project, we aborted a week into the expedition because my feet froze. We turned around and went back the way we came, across hard-fought miles and terrain. It was one of the hardest decisions in my life, but it was the right decision to carry on regardless, knowing that I would probably lose my toes, feet, and possibly a lot more would have been foolish. I didn't feel guilty about turning around on that expedition because I knew it was the right decision, because I knew that we had given everything we could for the success of that mission up until then. But if we hadn't attempted that in 2008, when my feet froze and we turned around, well, I'm sure we would not have attempted 3 years later, and we would not have had that chance for success. And the views from the other side are magical. So we must do everything we can to change the course of history that has been foretold. And we must do things differently to find another way, individually, within the institutions that we are part of, and in the way our countries operate independently and collectively. Because to carry on regardless is foolish. It's the most stupid thing we can do. And every vote you make must make climate and biodiversity breakdown as the top priority. This was in the winter of 2011. In fact, look at the next image. This was in the summertime the year before. In 2010, we took a group of students and recent graduates to Baffin Island to live amongst the Inuit and to travel 300 kilometers over some of the most spectacular sceneries on the planet, and one that is, of course, at the forefront of climate change. As part of the expedition, we were developing classroom materials and resources and interacting via our web platform directly with schools whilst on the expedition. And at the same time, I created a video project about climate change. But we almost didn't get a chance to finish that, as we had a disaster, or almost had a disaster, due to the extremely hot temperatures that we were experiencing. For 2 weeks of the expedition, we experienced temperatures that were greater than 25 degrees Celsius. And this made a big issue for river crossings. Now, there are a number of rivers that we had to cross along the route that we were taking. And these rivers are fed by meltwater that's coming off the glaciers. And that is a completely normal process. And in the wintertime, these glaciers will be then replenished. But the very high temperatures that we're experiencing means that there was more meltwater. The rivers were higher, they were faster, and crossing them became more dangerous. But 3 weeks into the expedition, traveling over 250 kilometers, we had crossed many, many rivers, and we were literally, again, right close to Paddington, and we had only had one more river to cross. And this river, which we woke up specifically at 4 a.m. in the morning to cross, and we camped right on the banks to be right at ready to cross as soon as we woke up. And we crossed at 4 a.m. because that's when the meltwater, the rivers is at the lowest before the heat of the day starts to warm, the glaciers melt more water and the rivers become higher. And here we have Rachel and Anthony, the other two leaders on the expedition, scouting the route before committing the rest of the group. Typically, we don't cross rivers that are greater than knee high. We must find a different way to cross because if it goes above your knees, then you're very likely to be washed away and lose your footings. And here you can see that the water is approaching knee high here. And you have to remember that this water is about 2 or 3 degrees Celsius only as well. And this was the last photo I took before launching a rescue mission. You can see that the water is waist high. Anthony and Rachel are clearly struggling. In fact, they're trying to get back across instead of continuing to the other side. I got the rest of the groups and split them into teams of 2 and positioned them downstream at various points and starting to edge them out into the river. And no sooner had I done that Anthony and Rachel both lost their footings and starting to be swept away. The bags were filling up with water and dragging them under, and they struggled to keep their heads above water. Fortunately, having positioned several groups from the team downstream, that we managed to grab hold of Anthony, and another group managed to grab hold of Rachel and drag them back to shore safely. And despite the fact that they were a little bit hypothermic and bruised and battered with the boulders that were crashing into them, that they were perfectly safe and sound. And so I did get a chance of finishing the film, this climate change video, which I'd like to share a small section of with you.
The climate is changing and we are contributing to this. But why should we care?
Why? Because there's since time began, it's estimated that 99% of all species on the planet have become extinct. And yes, that's nature's cycle and kind of that's the law of nature and all the rest of it. But how long have we really been around for in terms of how are we technologically advanced? Is it since the Industrial Revolution? Is it since the birth of Christ? Is it looking back further than that? The environment we're in here, these rocks are like 2.2 billion years old. Yeah, in our time scale, Industrial Revolution, 150, 200 years. in a whole scheme of things, we haven't been around for that long, but yet we're having the biggest impact on the planet. Why is that important? Because, well, we need to, be very aware that we don't slide into that 99% category just yet.
I think we need to, for the wider population, we need it to conserve our environment that we thrive in so well, because it's the perfect environment that we can live in. But for me personally, I love the planet as it is. I want all the species there. I want to learn. I want to go into the rainforests and see them there. I don't want to go into a patch of grass full of cows for McDonald's burgers. I want to actually go into the Amazon. I want to be able to go onto the ice caps and see them and experience the world how it is. And then I think for the wider world, it's the environment that we thrive in. And we need it. Otherwise, well, we don't know how we're going to survive afterwards.
Limiting climate change is not about saving the planet. This planet has endured climatic conditions that are far more extreme than what we're talking about. But our very evolution, and in fact, our entire evolution history, has been adapted for this cool period in the Earth's climate, and all our advanced technologies and societies relies on it. I'd like to finish off by reiterating what Rachel said in the video. For me personally, I want to go into the rainforest, into the ice caps, but it's bigger than that. We need it. Otherwise, we don't know how we're going to survive. Thank you.
Thank you, Vijay Bhai. That was wow, is what I would say. So much information, and I'm sure you've done this many times before. Presentation. What are the responses you get from people you present to?
It's a lot of people think, well, it can't be that bad. Otherwise, well, if it is that bad, why aren't we doing stuff about it? And that's anyone that knows the science and everyone that has seen the science is asking the same very question. So a little bit of disbelief. It is overwhelming, and it is, and that causes a lot of people to like go, okay, I don't want to deal with this. But well, that's not the solution, and we really need to tackle these things head on. I mean, the coronavirus pandemic shows that perfectly, and it's a very small kind of it's a small crisis that kind of shows that it's a shoebox crisis that kind of shows what we have to deal with, and the sooner we deal with it, and the sooner we accept the science, and I think we can kind of accept and understand this and accept, and it does hurt, seeing where we are headed, but then also know that if we do everything we can do, well, then we've got no regrets. And thus those are the parallels that I see with an expedition, and the times that I've had to turn around, the times that we haven't met our objectives, that I know that I've done everything I can to have created that success. So I don't feel any regret.
I mean, just one of the things that you mentioned was I was on a talk on COVID and why the BAME group doesn't want to take, some of the communities don't want to take the vaccination. Is it also about education or lack of awareness that people aren't taking action? Okay, we're hearing about electric cars more and more. People want to go there, but one, it's quite expensive, and they stick with a cheaper option. If it's expensive enough, well, if the car's expensive, people are going to say, well, I'll take the petrol car because it's easier. Is that going to change, do you think?
Oh, absolutely. Having worked on an electric car project myself, it is the future. The internal combustion engine in a car vehicle will go. That's for sure. At the moment, the economics aren't. It's like they're expensive, electric vehicles, and the range hasn't been there. But that's flipping as more technology has is getting in there. And in fact, the next generation of vehicles, of electric vehicles, can do just as much as you can expect from a petrol car. So economics is one thing. Obviously, people are wanting to do whatever's cheapest. But really, is that what's always right? And that's where education comes in. And why aren't we being educated as much as we should be about this massive topic that should be as a priority? It should be headline news every day until we fix it, but it's not. And that's because there's a lot of vested interest to keep the status quo. And that's only for short-term gains to a very few people. Unfortunately, that's not beneficial for the rest of us.
Just want to see if Madhusudan Bhai or Manita Ben have got any questions for Vijay Bhai. Or
Yes, I've got a few questions, Vijay Bhai. We didn't have from audience, but how do you see climate change affecting the planets in the next 50 years if no significant changes are made?
Well, number one, you can see that in fact, so in the next 50 years, we're going to see that the temperature is going to increase by 1.5 degrees Celsius at least, if not already 2 degrees Celsius. And the way that we can understand how it's going to change is by looking in the past. And climate scientists and paleo researchers, they look into the past by looking at ice cores and understanding how the world was in similar situations. So showing that it was actually not a very nice place at all. In fact, it's very different from what we've experienced. So we're going to see coastal communities all being destroyed. Already there's a village in Wales, the Fairbourne village actually, where the government has already said that they're not going to do anything to save, to protect, to increase their flood defences. And all of a sudden, and this is fact now, that the residents in that village, their houses, which is always our number one asset that all of us have, are worthless. They're worthless. No one's going to want to buy these houses, which will be flooded and will be taken up by the sea very soon. We're going to see this certainly in the UK across the communities. We're going to see areas that have been built on floodplains. They're going to get more and more flooded. So certainly in the Somerset levels, there's been a lot of developers that have built on floodplains. Well, that's going to get worse and worse, the floodings. So in the UK, which is actually a quite a benign climate, we're going to see big events like that. In the other places, in the rest of the world, which actually most of the rest of the world sees much greater extremes in weather, such as tornadoes and hurricanes to typhoons, and those are also going to increase in severity. And so we're going to see a lot more displacement of people, as well as both in terms of as a result of weather events, but also, as I said, about food insecurity. And in fact, the climate and global heating is very much a food security issue, which is obviously a major, without food, what do we do? And we're going to start seeing that here. And now in those couple of slides that I showed about the UK being rich enough not to be affected by food insecurity, well, we're getting our food from all of these poor countries. Now, if they suddenly cannot produce that much food, well, we're also going to start to see food insecurity issues.
Thank you. What was your favorite experience from the expedition?
It has to be that polar bear situation. Having said, I touched a baby polar bear. It was a very unfortunate situation, the fact that the young cub got separated from the mother. But having had 6 expeditions in the Arctic, I hadn't until that moment seen a polar bear. They always, I never managed to see one, and then I got so close to it. It was incredible to be so close to such an incredible animal, and I'm so glad that we managed to get the cub back to his mother, and for that family to continue their lives.
You're very lucky to have that experience. What did you find most challenging?
On that particular expedition, it was it's claustrophobia. It really is. So we're in this big expanse of nothingness. We can see miles and miles and horizons, nothing in our way. Yet it's very claustrophobic because we're covered in all of this equipment and stuff to keep us warm. So we've got goggles, we've got a mask on, and my vision. The reason why I have to twist around to see anything that's going on because your vision is so limited by your goggles. So it actually can feel very claustrophobic. And when you are skiing, especially in a whiteout where you've got no visual references, nothing else going on, for hours at a time, it can feel very closed. Your world can feel very closed. And when you're doing that 12 hours a day for a few days and you haven't seen the sun, well, that's pretty hard.
Vijay, but there's some obviously a lot of comments here. Reduced animal exploitation is one. Obviously, congratulating you on your talk. Well presented by many people making comments. It's what can we do in the community is one of the questions.
Well, certainly, I'd say that. Okay, well, where's the finance? Where is what? For instance, OSHA, I'm sure, as an organisation, has some savings somewhere. How is that being invested? Is that invested in these companies that are leading? You know, most greenhouse gases, in fact, is by it being released around the world, is being done by a handful of companies. And these companies, they're some of the largest companies in the world, is where a lot of pensions, a lot of organisations, a lot of funds are investing their money in. So take that money out. You know, stop funding these companies that are leading to that are destroying this planet for our children, and let's fund companies that are actually contributing to a better world.
Have you got any questions?
I haven't got a question, but Vijay, very fascinating to see your videos on the polar journeys. But at the same time, I did see a number of your videos on your blog. And what I would recommend to the viewers is that they should go on your blog and have a look at so many of the other films you have made. And there is so much material on them, like what you've shown us today. So that's my recommendation.
I think vijayshah.info, is that correct?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, the blog is on vijayshah.info. So I think, yeah, it is a good blog. I've had a look as well. But I think a lot of the comments are really about how can we make changes. As Jains, we need to promote and become vegans, reduce our food mileage. You're a vegan as well, right?
Yes, that's right. In fact, I became in 2015 when I was writing this presentation for the first time, and I was vegetarian before that, and it didn't make it didn't make any sense. I couldn't physically know that I'm literally contributing to this to the end of this world as we've known it so far.
It's one of the things that you showed on the graph. You've got the cattle and meat producing a lot of gas, but one of the things is dairy as well, which is again quite a big contributor, which I was quite surprised at.
Yeah, exactly. Well, it comes from cows, so
yeah. I shouldn't be surprised, but yeah, it kind of, you don't think about it because you kind of just think meat is
and I was in that same position in 2015, and when I saw the science, saw the figures themselves, it became abundantly clear that, well, really, if I'm for the reasons why I was vegetarian is equally the reasons why I should no longer be vegetarian. I should be vegan.
Yeah, no, I think again, insulating homes, green conversion, that sort of things, comments coming up. I feel that there's lack of information out there for us to make an informed decision about something. Electric cars are in the frame at the moment, so you know a lot more about them, but there's lots of other things that could be changed, but I don't think we as public are aware of them.
Yeah, there is absolutely. And there is also, on top of the amount of choices, and I say we got too many choices, there is a lot of misinformation out there, and that's done on purpose. There are a lot of vested interests that want to create doubt and make confusion so people don't change. But I'd say, instead of concentrating about what we can change, concentrate on reducing consumption, because really we just can't just keep on producing and this throwaway culture. So the less things we produce, obviously, the less greenhouse gases that we're emitting, because we're no longer manufacturing these items. Everything we buy has to be extracted from the ground. There's greenhouse gases emitted in mining or extracting that or growing that on plants or on animals, and then it has to be manufactured. Again, more greenhouse gases are emitted. Then it has to be shipped wherever it's coming from, and arrives to us, and then we use it, and then obviously dispose. And all of these stages emits greenhouse gases. And so, really, why do we need all of these things? We've been led falsely into thinking that this consumerism enriches our lives, and actually, again, I'd say, go back to the elders, and they would say, actually, life was a lot happier when it was a lot simpler and we didn't have so much, and that very much is true. And I can vouch for that on my trips, on my expeditions, when we didn't have anything. We just had skiing for 12 hours a day and then sleeping and a bit of a chat, and actually, that was a much happier existence than I do on a daily basis, that I have. So much simpler lifestyle is actually a much happier one.
Yeah, I agree with you. Going back to India and the villages, it's a better experience than living in cities sometimes. So, and you can feel the quietness and the clear air as well. So I think, Vijay Bhai, if anybody hasn't got any questions, I think we'll end it today. Vijay Bhai, really thank you on behalf of Westphal Association of UK. Madhusudan Bhai, thank you for joining us and introducing Vijay Bhai. And Nita Ben, thank you for hosting. So Vijay Bhai, thank you, and we will catch up with you soon again.
Thank you very much. It was a
Thank
pleasure
you.
to be with you.